Hello everyone. In this next video, I'm going to talk about setting. Setting is very important in world building because it enables the characters, the technology, the transports, everything to interact. So setting is one of the building blocks, not only for world building, but afterwards for good storytelling. So I'm going to talk about the different components of setting, and then what ways I have learned to develop setting and apply it to my stories. So first of all, what is setting? According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is the time, place, and circumstance in which something occurs and develops. So we're talking here about time and space mainly. Okay, so given that observation, we can say, or I have more or less divided setting into three dimensions. You have the space dimension, time dimension, and have identified an additional one called motion, which I'm going to talk about in the following video. So what do we know about space? Space is defined as the physical space where the story takes place. It is important to create a physical space that is plausible to the reader in order for the characters to be able to interact in a more logical and realistic way. This helps afterwards with story cohesiveness, and therefore it's very important to keep in mind to build your the space that your characters interact in as realistic as possible. Realistic doesn't necessarily mean real. I mean, you can have real components taken from our world and extrapolate them into your projected world. So it's more of striking a balance with the with familiarity and the strange. If you can achieve that, then you have perfect world building, because you have both worlds. You have things where people can understand immediately and can therefore build a foundation, in things that are strange and therefore give them the capacity to explore and want to remain there and learn more things. So it's impossible. No, it's not impossible. It's important to strike that balance. As a way of example, as an example, I have to mention Tolkien, because for me Tolkien is the master in world building. Although he was from fantasy realm, it's very clear the contrast between Rivendell, which is an elven fortress where Lord Elrond lives, and the rest of Middle Earth. You see how Rivendell is very idealistically depicted. It has Art Nouveau type architecture, is surrounded by forests, lush gardens, everything. For most people, they would say, okay, that's fantasy, okay, but and then you see the rest of Middle Earth, where elves do not live. I mean, especially you see south of Gondor and you see Mordor and all those places. It's very, what George Lucas calls used space, which is, it's so greedy and so looks so dull and so realistic that people actually get to identify themselves more with that, because it looks more real. But actually, the idea behind this is that the contrast is the idea is this: Rivendell wasn't tainted by the power of Mordor as most of Middle Earth did. So that's why Rivendell looks so beautiful, like so heavenly like, as opposed to the rest of Middle Earth. Um, then there's another um, dimension, which is time. Time is very important because it gives depth and realism to your novel. Um, I recall when I was a kid and watched A New Hope from Star Wars. Uh, there's a brief exchange between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker, and Luke Skywalker and Ben Kenobi tells Luke what about the dark times, about the times before the Empire, how the how the Jedi were the ones who maintained peace and order in the galaxy. I mean, just that piece of information makes you want to read more about that time. That's one of the reasons why I like the prequel so much, Episode 1 through 3. Um, Although most people don't like it, but I do, because I mean, you get to see what Ben Kenobi was referring to as the Jedi Knights, as the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. So, I mean, that's amazing. And when you go from fantasy to science fiction and to all the other all subsets of space fantasies, etc., you get to see the different nuances that the writers have employed. You have in you have the time in Narnia, which is very different to the time on Earth. Uh, 1 minute in on Earth could mean 100 years in Narnia, and you see the difference between the witch, the wardrobe, and the lion, as opposed to the next chapter, which was Prince Caspian. When the characters return to Narnia, the place has aged about 100 years or so. So they see the ruins of Park Caravel, and that's for me as a visually speaking. And when I read it, I was amazed at the depth of the world, how much you could understand what had happened just by listening to the children talk about the ruins. I mean, they were like an archaeologist rediscovering, unearthing something that was lost to time. So that's very not only beautiful but also extremely interesting. And that's one of the reasons why I like this genre so much. You can lose yourself in this worlds. Um, okay, then there's a third dimension, which this is an artificial um, classification that I made for my purposes and for explaining to you the importance of setting and how to identify it and how to develop it. You have motion. Motion is the medium for movement throughout your world. The thing with motion in this case is that you can also develop scenes there, and can enable your characters to further develop themselves. You have, for example, you have in the movie Aliens and many of Robert Heinlein, no, of I think Planet of the Apes was that, where they use cryosleep. Cryosleep is sort of suspended animation, where your character's physiological activities are put into minimum, and therefore you can get from point A to point B, even though it lasts 30 years, and the people on the ship, they don't age. The problem with that is what happened with Ripley in Aliens. She was rescued, like 60 years later, and she found out that everyone she knew was dead. So that could make for dramatic scenes and characterizations in your story. That could be a good idea. Then there are many others. One of my favorite ones is hyperspace, and that's been heavily employed by Robert Heinlein, the author of Starship Troopers. and also in Star Wars. Hyperspace it stems from two ideas. First, of going in light speed, you know, but at the same time being able to travel between dimensions. Because if you only travel by light speed, um, you will become energy. so so the thing is to travel between dimensions. The good thing is, I mean, you can travel in a um, relatively fast, and also um, you omit the dull things that, dull explanations that happen in hardcore science fiction, that that will bog down the story. So it's a very easy way to get through your world without heavy exposition. Um, the thing with yeah, I mean, when in my case for Green Legion, I started using this technology, but then switched to Northern Flight, which is a more spiritual exchange between the characters and the ships they use. Um, I've explained more on Northern Flight and why I developed that in the written version. So feel free to visit my website. So moving on, it's um, it's important to ask the right questions in order to develop your world. What if is the fundamental question. What if there was life on other planets? What if they used more advanced technology? What would be the consequences of spaceflight? What would be the consequences in agriculture, in medicine, in every single aspect of life? From that question, you can derive secondary questions. Like what do they eat? Do they wear armor, spacesuits? How do they breathe? Such questions come when you have asked this "what if" question many times and have answered it. Um, then you can start. When you have answered these questions, you can start, writing about this stuff, about the technology, about the geology of a planet, about the history, everything. So it all produces a sort of a cascade effect upon everything, and then you come to a point where you cannot stop. You keep writing and writing about your thing, and it's very interesting. I mean, you also have to be disciplined in order for you also to keep writing the novel, because that's the most important part. But we're building. That's the thing. I mean, it never ends. It's an ongoing thing. There are data management, project management apps such as on Aeon Timeline and Scrivener, where you can manage all your data, and then it will be easier for you to create cohesiveness in your world and be able to um, do like a researcher to if you have a question on certain character, a certain planet, you can return to your database and read again what you wrote. So um, you're writing two books at the same time. Right? That's the way I feel. So that will be it for now. Um, be sure to visit my website, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're interested, and you can read more about what I said in my written presentation. So I thank you and have a nice weekend. Bye bye.